All right. Well, thank you all for being here. Welcome to the Colorado West Land Trust lunch series webinar. Happy you guys could all be here on this beautiful spring day. I know it's getting harder to join during lunch webinars now that we are having such beautiful weather. So thank you for spending time with us. Today we have Mark Hermundstad presenting on some water items, specifically looking at kind of mountain diversions and who owns the water, which I think is a very timely issue to be talking about. So hopefully we'll all learn a lot. I know I sure will. And Mark Hermundstad is on the board here at the Colorado West Land Trust. We have a 17-member board. We're very lucky to have every single one of you actively engaged in the organization. And Mark, thank you for taking some time to be with us today and share some of your vast breadth of knowledge. Mark was an attorney with William Turner and Holmes for over 36 years, and then was general counsel for the Ute Water Conservancy District. So has extensive experience with the water world. And he and his wife, Sarah, have 2 daughters and enjoy being here in Western Colorado. And I think your background, Mark, I know you've done a lot of sharing of your knowledge and presentations with the community, and we're very grateful for you to be here today and share with us as well. So without further ado, Mark, I'll let you take it from here. And I do want to say, Mark, I know in the past you've been comfortable taking questions as we go along, and I'll just keep an eye on the chat box. And also, if people raise their hands, there's a little way to raise your hand. I'll try to keep an eye on that as well. But feel free to type any questions you have in the chat box, and I'll keep an eye on those and holler them out to you, Mark, as we're going along, if you don't mind.
Excellent. I'd like that. Thank you.
Great.
Let me see if I can share my screen. Okay, can everyone see that? I hope so.
It looks good, Mark.
Okay, good. Well, thanks everyone for being here today. This is the 4th webinar that I've done over the past couple of months. And today's webinar will kind of take off on some of the other other webinars that I've given over the past couple of months. We'll hit some of the same topics that I did in some of my other talks and put some meat on the bones. So today I'm going to talk about 3 different subjects. The first topic will be the major calls on the Colorado River, and I'll explain what a call is. The second topic will be talking about some of the major Colorado River reservoirs that benefit the West Slope. And then I'll finish up by talking about some of the major trans-mountain diversions taking water from the Colorado River Basin over to the East Slope. And there's a lot to cover here. And so this is going to be a pretty high level overview. There are a lot of details that I'll be leaving out. There are a lot of interesting backstories on all of these topics that I won't have time to get to today. So it'll be pretty much just an overview of these 3 topics and give you some flavor of these 3 things. So let's get into it. The first topic is major Colorado River calls. The photo here is the roller dam, the Grand Valley Diversion Dam that I've talked about in a prior talk. This is a major diversion dam on the Colorado River in Debec Canyon. And let me give you a little background first of all. In Colorado, our water system is a priority system. And so basically, the older your water right is, the more secure it is, the more likely it is that the water under your water right will be available for you to divert. And in Colorado, court decrees determine the priority of a water right. And so we have a court system here in Colorado that confirms water rights and determines what the priority of the water rights is. So what is a call? When a senior water right, one of the old water rights is not getting the water that it's entitled to, it can call up the state water officials and say, I'm not getting my water. What I want you to do is start cutting off people who are junior to my water right, some of the more recent water rights, and that way create more water to come down to satisfy my water right. So when a senior water right is not getting its water and asks the state to intervene, that's called a call. The senior water right is calling for the water that it's entitled to. On the Colorado River, there are two major calls or calling areas that we like to pay attention to when we're looking at the Colorado River. The first is colloquially known as the CAMEO call. And before I get into the CAMEO call, I just wanted to explain this map because I'm going to be using it a lot in today's presentation. This is a map that was created by the Colorado River Water Conservation District in Glenwood Springs a number of years ago. And I like it because it's simple and but yet has a fair amount of detail on it. So if you look at the map and follow my cursor, the Colorado River runs from west to east from the state line up to the headwaters above Granby. That's the main line here. And there are a number of major tributaries that are shown on this map that come into the Colorado River. The Roaring Fork River comes in near Glenwood Springs. The Frying Pan is a tributary to the Roaring Fork, and I'll be talking about that today with the FRYARK project. The Eagle River is another major tributary of the Colorado River that comes in near Dotsero, heads up into the Vail area, and I'll be talking about that today. And going upstream, the Blue River is yet another major tributary of the Colorado that comes into the Colorado near Kremling. This is a very important river for a number of purposes that I'll be talking about today. And then we have the Fraser River up in the Granby area that has a major trans-mountain diversion for Denver system out of it. So I'll be referring to this map a number of times today. I just wanted to give you some an overview of it so you know what you're seeing here. So back to the CAMEO call. The CAMEO call is really a call or a potential call for a group of water rights here in the Grand Valley. This slide shows all of the water rights that comprise the CAMEO call. For purposes of the CAMEO call, you can ignore this 400, 800 CFS water right. That's a water right to produce power, and it really doesn't participate in the CAMEO call for reasons I won't get into. But if you look at all the rest of the water rights on this slide, these are all agricultural water rights. They provide irrigation water here in the Grand Valley. And if you total all of these up, they total a little under 2,000 CFS, which is a very substantial amount of water. If some of these water rights are not getting the water that they're entitled to, you'll see they have fairly old appropriation dates here, so they're very senior water rights. If they're not getting the water that they're entitled to, they can call up the division engineer in Glenwood Springs and place a call on the river. And then the state engineer, the division engineer will start shutting off junior water rights up and down the Colorado River until a satisfactory flow of water comes down here to the Grand Valley. So and I've talked about these water rights in a prior talk, so I'm not going to go into them in detail today. But obviously the CAMEO call is a very critical call for the Grand Valley. It ensures that we have an adequate supply of ag water for the agriculture here in the Grand Valley. Continuing upstream, the other major calling right on the Colorado River is associated with the Shoshone power plant. in Glenwood Canyon. And this obviously is known as the Shoshone Call. The Shoshone Power Plant is an old facility. It was built in the early 1900s and consists of a couple of components. The photo here shows a diversion dam in the Colorado River. This is right by the west portal of the tunnel that's in the middle of Glenwood Canyon. You can't really see it from the interstate just because of the curve of the interstate, but it's down in the Colorado River. And what it does is divert water from the river into a pipeline that then travels a couple of miles downstream through the canyon cliffs to the Shoshone Power Plant itself. This is a photo of the power plant. And if you look on this photo, you'll see these two white pipes coming out of the hillside. The pipeline from the Colorado River comes and ends at these two pipes. These are penstocks that take the water into the power plant to turn the turbines to produce the hydroelectric power at the Shoshone Power Plant. The Shoshone Power Plant is important because it has a couple of very senior water rights. The most senior right is for 1250 CFS with a priority date of something like 1904 or 1905. And then it has a junior right for 158 CFS. So the total right calling rights at the Shoshone Power Plant total a little over 1400 CFS. The junior right doesn't produce a whole lot of water. It gets water in the springtime, but as the flows in the Colorado River go down, the junior right goes out of priority, and even if it were calling, there's not enough water in the system to satisfy it. So generally, the calling right that we're concerned with at the Shoshone Power Plant is this 1250 CFS senior right. And that's going to be calling up for water for most of the year. Generally, all of the irrigation season, the call is on. And the importance of this water right is that it's located on the Colorado River below most of the major trans-mountain diversions. So as shown on this map, the Shoshone Power Plant is down here below the confluence of the Eagle and the Colorado Rivers. Up above it are a number of trans-mountain diversion projects. We have the Homestake Project. We have Denver Water's Blue River Project and Fraser River Project. And then we have the Colorado Big Thompson Project. I'll be talking about all of these at the end of my talk today, but the importance of the Shoshone Power Plant is it's senior to all of these water rights up here. And so when it's calling for water, which is most of the time, these projects have to either let water go down to the Shoshone Power Plant or find another source of water to release down there to make up for their diversions over the hill. So the Shoshone Power Plant is very critical for keeping water flowing in the Colorado River in a westerly direction, as opposed to having it go over the hill in an easterly direction. It's also important because it's a non-consumptive right. In other words, the water is used to produce power, and then it's dumped back into the stream and continues on downstream to help folks below the power plant. And really, the Shoshone Power Plant is very critical to us here in the Grand Valley. By keeping a steady flow of water coming down the river, it really makes canal operations much more efficient down here in the Grand Valley. If we just had to rely on the CAMEO call to get water down to us, it becomes a little more problematic, because if we're getting low on water down here in the Grand Valley and place a call, it'll take 2 or 3 days for the water to get from the shut-off water rights in the headwaters all the way down here. So it becomes a game of predicting when you need the water, and there could be intervening rainstorms that obviate the need for the call. We down here in the Grand Valley prefer to rely on the Shoshone Power Plant being in place and just keeping a steady flow of water coming down here. It's really helpful to the Grand Valley. If there's one thing that you should remember from this talk, it's pay attention to the Shoshone power plant. That's a critical point on the Colorado River, and something that we down here in the lower part of the river want to see continue into the future. We don't want that power plant and its rights to go away for any reason. So that's about all I'm going to say on the major calling rights on the Colorado River. Now I'd like to change gears and talk a little bit about some of the major reservoirs on the Colorado River that benefit the west slope. The first one I want to talk about is Green Mountain Reservoir. I've circled it here on the map. Green Mountain Reservoir is located on the Blue River above Kremling. It's a component of a trans-mountain diversion project known as the Colorado Big Thompson Reclamation Project that was built in the 1940s and 1950s. As I mentioned, it's located on the Blue River above Kremling. It's owned by the Bureau of Reclamation. Its capacity is about 154,000 acre-feet of water. It's a fairly substantial reservoir. The basic operations of Green Mountain Reservoir are governed by several documents. Kind of the constitution for Green Mountain Reservoir is a document known as Senate Document 80. Senate Document 80 is a document that was adopted by the US Senate back in 1937. And what it does is evidence an agreement between the East Slope and the West Slope as to how Green Mountain Reservoir and the Colorado Big Thompson project would operate. And then there are some court decrees that were entered initially in the 1950s that incorporated Senate Document 80 and put some meat on the bones of how Green Mountain Reservoir would operate. And then finally, there was an operating policy that was adopted by the Bureau of Reclamation in the early 1980s that changed some of the operations of Green Mountain Reservoir and created some additional pools in Green Mountain Reservoir. And so the basic operations of Green Mountain Reservoir as set forth in Senate Document 80 are set forth on this slide. The first pool of water in Green Mountain Reservoir is a 52,000 acre-foot pool, which is used to replace diversions to northeastern Colorado. So for example, if the Shoshone call is on the stream and the Colorado Big Thompson project is out of priority because it's a junior water right, it can release water from this 52,000 acre-foot pool to make up for the water that's it is diverting over to the eastern slope. So the 52,000 acre-foot pool is a replacement or an augmentation pool for the diversions over to northeastern Colorado. The next pool is a 100,000 acre-foot pool that is dedicated to west slope uses. And that 100,000 acre-foot pool has been split into a number of sub-pools. There's 5,000 acre-feet that are dedicated to a project in the silt area, another reclamation project known as the Silt Project. And then there's a 66,000 acre-foot pool that was created by that 1980s operating policy. This pool is to provide water to pre-1978 west slope agriculture and municipal uses. So in order to benefit from this pool of water, an agriculture or municipal use had to be in place prior to 1978. This pool of water is known as the Historic Users Pool, or the HUP. You may hear that talked about in news articles from time to time. Actually, the 66,000 acre-foot pool is used primarily by the agricultural water rights down here in the Grand Valley. So this pool of water supplements our agricultural rights at the CAMEO call. And without this pool of water, we would be in for very lean times for those water rights later in the irrigation season. So the 66,000 acre-foot historic users pool is critical to the agricultural uses in the Grand Valley. Now, because of efficiency improvements down here in the Grand Valley, oftentimes there's water available in that 66,000 acre-foot pool at the end of the season. It's not all used up, and due to a number of arrangements that have been made over the years, that excess water in the historic users pool is often available for use to for the endangered fish down here in the Grand Valley. And so the 66,000 acre-foot pool is important not only to maintain consumptive uses, but to benefit the endangered fish. Then there's also a contract pool that can be used for people to contract for water from Green Mountain Reservoir. And power is also produced by the water that's released from Green Mountain Reservoir. So the reservoir in the background on this photo is a photo of Green Mountain Reservoir. This prior slide that I talked about, that's also a photo of Green Mountain Reservoir. It's a pretty reservoir. It's very important to the western slope, and it was built as part of the Colorado Big Thompson project to basically as compensatory storage for the west slope to allow the trans-mountain diversions to continue. So the next reservoir I'd like to talk about is Ruedi Reservoir. Again, it's a compensatory storage reservoir that was built as part of the FRYINGPAN-ARKANSAS project that I'll talk about. It's located on the Frying Pan River above the town of Basalt. I guess I've covered most of this stuff. It's owned by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. This is a photo of Ruedi from standing near the dam. It has a capacity of a little over 100,000 acre-feet of water. The water in Ruedi is all used on the western slope. Part of the water in Ruedi is used as compensatory storage for diversions to the east slope, similar to what Green Mountain Reservoir is used for. And then there's a big contract pool in Ruedi Reservoir where West Slope municipal and industrial users can enter into contracts to get water out of Ruedi. An example of this is Ute Water back in the mid 2000 teens. It purchased 12,000 acre-feet of Ruedi water. And so that water is available to Ute Water every year as a backup for its system. Ute Water's system basically gets its water off of the Grand Mesa, but in times of shortage, Ute Water could look to this 12,000 acre-feet to supplement its supplies. And a number of other West Slope industrial and municipal users also have similar contracts, albeit much smaller than Ute Water's contract. The water in Ruedi is also used to produce power. So when the water is released from the reservoir, it produces power on the way down to where it joins the Frying Pan River. There are a couple of pools of water in Ruedi that are dedicated solely to the endangered fish. And so Ruedi is an important reservoir for helping to maintain the habitat for the endangered fish here in the Grand Valley. And a common adage for the endangered fish is, if the fish ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. So it's very important to keep pools of water available for the fish and to keep them happy and keep their habitat in good shape. And then finally, the reservoir is used for recreation purposes. You'll see in this photo down in the lower right, a marina with sailboats and other boats that use this reservoir for recreational purposes. So Ruedi is the second reservoir I wanted to talk about that benefits the western slope. The third is Wolford Mountain Reservoir that is located on Muddy Creek above the town of Kremling, north of the town of Kremling. Wolford Mountain Reservoir is owned and managed by the Colorado River Water Conservation District. It's a relatively newbie on the Colorado River. It was built in 1995, as a result of an agreement between the River District, Northern Water, and Denver Water. It has a capacity of about 66,000 acre feet, and 40% of that water is allocated to Denver. Up until now, Denver Water has just been leasing that water, but the agreement between the River District and Denver was that I think it was in 2020, the 40% of the reservoir capacity was actually to be conveyed to the River District, so they would own it rather than lease it. There was a little monkey wrench that was thrown into that several years ago. It was determined that the dam for the reservoir is moving. It flexes when the reservoir fills, and then contracts when the reservoir goes lower. And so there's been a lot of engineering work that's been done trying to determine the cause of this and whether there's concern over a dam failure or potential dam failure. The engineering has shown that the likelihood of a dam failure is very, very small. But whenever you have a big dam like this that has movement in it, that's cause for concern. Because of that, Denver is a little bit worried about buying into a moving dam, and so it's my understanding that the transfer of the 40% interest has not occurred yet. That Denver is still leasing the water, and that they're trying to work on the dam issues before the 40% is actually transferred to Denver. The purposes of Wolford Mountain Reservoir are shown on this slide. Some of the water is used as mitigation for another trans-mountain diversion called the Windy Gap Project. That Windy Gap Project is kind of a cousin of the Colorado Big Thompson project. I'll talk a little bit about both of those here in just a minute. So some of the water is used for mitigation for Windy Gap. The River District also contracts with people in Western Colorado who need the water for augmentation or other purposes. So if somebody needs water, they can enter into a contract with the River District to purchase water out of Wolford Mountain Reservoir. Wolford also has a pool of water for the endangered fish to help maintain their habitat here in the Grand Valley. And then Denver uses its interest in the water as substitution water for some of its diversions upstream. So if Shoshone is calling for water and Denver has to shut off some of its diversions or provide substitution water, it will provide substitution water from Wolford Mountain Reservoir to allow its diversions upstream to continue. So I think that's all I have on the West Slope reservoirs. I'm going to pause here for a minute. Ilana, I don't know if you have any questions that have been brought up to this time.
Yes, I do actually. Going back a little bit, I had a question from Larry Traubel, wondering what would endanger the Shoshone right? What are some examples there?
A very good question. Very good question. There's always been concern that somebody upstream would buy the Shoshone water right and retire it. So somebody could buy that water right and basically abandon it, saying we don't want to produce power anymore, and that would take the call off of the stream and make more water available for upstream trans-mountain diversions. That has been a concern raised historically with Denver Water. People were concerned that Denver Water would try to do something like that. The power plant is owned by Xcel, and so Xcel would have to agree to sell that water right to Denver. But due to an agreement that was entered into between Denver and a whole bunch of West Slope entities back in 2013, Denver agreed not to do that. So some of the pressure is off, but that doesn't mean that somebody else could not come and buy that water right. Another concern is that the Shoshone power plant is a very old power plant. It's a minor part of Xcel's power production. And there's always concern that a rock could come down and wipe out the power plant, and Xcel could decide not to rebuild it. And so if it's not producing power, then the water right can't call for water, and it could come off of the call could go away also. So those are a couple of ways that bad things could happen that could adversely impact the Shoshone call.
Thank you. That's the only question I have so far.
Okay, cool. Okay, the last part of my talk then is talking about Trans Mountain diversions. This is a photo of Dillon Reservoir, which is part of Denver's system. But let me give you a little background first of all. As I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, we have a priority system in Colorado for dealing with water. It's called the Prior Appropriation Doctrine. And basically an appropriation of water is when somebody diverts or controls water and applies that water to beneficial use. That's called an appropriation, and that appropriation creates a water right, which when it's confirmed in court, then it gives you a priority to the use of that water. The Prior Appropriation Doctrine is embodied in the Colorado Constitution. Article 16, Section 6, states that the right to divert the unappropriated waters of any natural stream to beneficial uses shall never be denied. Basically, what that is saying is that the prior appropriation is a part of Colorado's law. It's built into our Constitution, and people have the right to appropriate water and apply that water to beneficial use. Then the preceding section in the Constitution, Section 5, talks about the nature of ownership of water here in Colorado. And that section says that the water of every natural stream within the state is hereby declared to be the property of the public. And the same is dedicated to the use of the people of the state, subject to appropriation. So what that section of the Constitution is saying is that water in Colorado is a public resource. Nobody owns it. It belongs to the public, subject to appropriating it and creating water rights for specific uses. Now, the Constitution doesn't say that water arising in western Colorado can only be used by the western slope, and water in eastern Colorado can only be used by the eastern slope. What it says is the water in Colorado belongs to everybody in Colorado. So therein lies the problem. If you can find a way to take water from the west slope to the eastern slope and use it over on the eastern slope, that's allowed under our Constitution. So what happens in western Colorado doesn't necessarily stay here. And so that's the basis for creating Trans Mountain diversion water rights. It's a public resource, and entities on the east slope have spent a lot of time and energy and money to get water from the west slope to supplement their systems over on the eastern slope. So let me talk about some of those Trans Mountain diversions and just give you some information on the major ones anyway. The big well, before I get there, this is a map that the State Engineer's Office has created. It's a fairly busy map, but it shows all of the diversions from one basin to another in Colorado. In a prior talk, I talked about how the state has been divided into 7 water divisions that correspond to the major drainages in Colorado. So you have Water Division 1 is the South Platte River drainage. Division 2 is the Arkansas River. Division 3 is the Rio Grande. 4 is the Gunnison River Basin. Division 5 is the Colorado River Basin, excluding Gunnison River. Division 6 is the Yampa and the White River Basins. And Division 7 is rivers down in the southwest part of Colorado. And you'll see a lot of arrows going from Division 5, the Colorado River Basin, over to Divisions 1 and 2, both of which are over on the eastern slope. And so I'm going to talk about some of these trans-mountain diversions along here. I'm not going to talk about all of them. There are some minor ones there and a couple of major ones. So the big daddy is the Colorado Big Thompson project that I mentioned earlier when I was talking about Green Mountain Reservoir. Green Mountain Reservoir is a feature of the Colorado Big Thompson project. The CBT project takes water from the headwaters of the Colorado and diverts it to the east slope through a tunnel called the Adams Tunnel. This is a little more detailed diagram of the facilities on the west slope of the Colorado Big Thompson project. The primary facility is Lake Granby, up near Granby. Water is stored in this reservoir, and then it's pumped up to Shadow Mountain Reservoir, which is connected by a channel to Grand Lake, which is a natural lake up in this area. And then the Adams Tunnel comes out of Grand Lake and takes the water over to northeastern Colorado. I mentioned before, down here in the lower left, you have Green Mountain Reservoir shown as a feature of the Colorado Big Thompson project. And I explained the purposes of that previously, so I won't go into that anymore. But I also mentioned previously the Windy Gap Reservoir. That's a little reservoir just outside the town of Granby. It's not really a part of the Colorado Big Thompson project, but it's operated by a sub-district of the Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District. And basically what the Windy Gap project was designed to do is to pump water from a little facility here on the Colorado River up to Lake Granby. That water would then be taken through the Adams Tunnel over to the east slope to be used by a number of municipalities over on the east slope to supplement their water supplies. Due to a number of reasons, the Windy Gap Reservoir project has never really worked the way it was intended. They're trying to do some improvements now to make it work better, but basically it's kind of a stepchild here to the CBT project. And the CBT project is owned by the United States. As I said, it's a federal reclamation project. It's operated by the Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District, which was formed back in 1937. It's the first water conservancy district that was formed in Colorado, and it was formed to operate the Colorado Big Thompson project. The average diversions through the Adams Tunnel are over 200,000 acre feet per year. And just a note here, the amounts that I'm giving for trans-mountain diversions in this talk I got from the Water Education Colorado, which is a foundation that is dedicated to educating people on water in Colorado. Their information is somewhat inconsistent. They have a publication on trans-mountain diversions, and within that publication it gives a couple different numbers for a lot of trans-mountain diversion annual amounts. But this, in any event, gives kind of an order of magnitude amount of how much water is taken through the Adams Tunnel on an average basis. Now, 200,000 acre feet of water is a lot of water. Just for reference, down here in the Grand Valley, Ute Water diverts about 10,000 acre feet of water per year to serve all of the residents that it serves in the Grand Valley. So 200,000 acre feet is, you can see, is a lot of water that flows from the west slope over to the east slope. Once it's taken over to the east slope, it produces power, and it's stored in Horsetooth Reservoir, Carter Reservoir, and some other reservoirs over on the eastern slope. And it's used generally for agricultural purposes in northeastern Colorado and for municipal purposes over in that area. It's run by the Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District, very well-run operation. And it's a very important water source for the folks in northeastern Colorado. Switching gears, heading south a little bit, Denver Water also has a couple of major trans-mountain diversions. It diverts water through a tunnel known as the Moffat Tunnel and a second tunnel known as the Roberts Tunnel. So let me talk about each one of those in a little bit. For the Moffat Tunnel collection system, the water is collected from the headwaters of the Fraser River above the town of Granby and Fraser, and also from the Williams Fork River. And water from the Williams Fork River is actually taken through a tunnel called the Gumlick Tunnel from the Williams Fork River over to the eastern slope under the Continental Divide over to Clear Creek, and then it's diverted again from there back under the Continental Divide in the Vasquez Tunnel to the headwaters of the Fraser River. And then Denver has a bunch of collection facilities on the little tributaries up here that collects the water in the Fraser River headwaters and diverts it into the Moffat Tunnel. The Moffat Tunnel then takes the water over to South Boulder Creek, and the water is stored in Gross Reservoir on Boulder Creek. You may have heard about Gross Reservoir recently. Denver Water is seeking to raise the dam on Gross Reservoir by something like 140 feet. It wants to increase the size of Gross Reservoir so it can store more water over there. The county of Boulder is fighting Denver tooth and nail on that. The folks in Boulder County don't want to see that reservoir enlarged. You'll see news articles periodically about Gross Reservoir and Denver's efforts to try to enlarge that. That's going to continue that battle for some time, I'm sure. From Gross Reservoir, Denver will then take the water to service the northern part of its service territory. So the Moffat Tunnel system is one component of Denver's Trans Mountain system. The second component is Denver's Blue River system. Denver owns Dillon Reservoir, which is located near the town of Dillon. And actually, when Dillon Reservoir was built, it flooded the town of Dillon. And so the town had to be moved. And the water collects in Dillon Reservoir and is then diverted into a tunnel known as the Roberts Tunnel, which takes the water from the Blue River over to the South Platte River, where it's released and then stored in reservoirs downstream on the Platte River. Dillon Reservoir obviously is a big reservoir, 250,000 acre feet. Both of these systems divert a fairly substantial amount of water over to the eastern slope to serve Denver Water's territory. On average, 110,000 acre feet per year for the two tunnel systems. I should have looked this up before the talk today, but I think these Trans Mountain diversions provide about half of Denver Water's water for its system. So the Trans Mountain diversions are a very critical component of the supply for the Denver water area. And then the last TMD that I want to talk about in any detail is the FRYINGPAN-ARKANSAS project. As I mentioned before, Ruedi Reservoir is the compensatory storage reservoir for the FRYARK project. The FRYARK project collects water in the headwaters of the Frying Pan River and then diverts that water into the Boosted Tunnel. The Boosted Tunnel then delivers the water over to Turquoise Lake in the Arkansas River drainage and to Twin Lakes, which is also in the Arkansas River drainage. The FRYARK project is another reclamation project. It's owned by the United States, operated by the Southeastern Water Conservancy District. Average annual diversions a little over 50,000 acre feet a year, and the water is used for agriculture and municipal purposes in southeastern Colorado. There are a number of other Trans Mountain diversions that were shown on that map that I showed before. The Grand River Ditch is located above Granby. It diverts waters from the headwaters of the Colorado River over to the Cache-la-Poudre River in the Fort Collins area. And that water is used for agricultural purposes in northeastern Colorado. The town of Colorado, or the city of Colorado Springs, has a collection system above Dillon Reservoir on the Blue River. It has a tunnel called the Hoosier Tunnel that takes this Blue River water and dumps it into the Arkansas River Basin, where it's collected by Colorado Springs and then used in its system. There's a tunnel called the Twin Lakes Tunnel that diverts water from the headwaters of the Roaring Fork River over to Twin Lakes Reservoir in the Arkansas River Basin. The water that's diverted through the Twin Lakes Tunnel is used by Colorado Springs, Pueblo, Aurora, and East Slope agricultural interests. There's a project called the Homestake Project in the headwaters of the Eagle River. Water is collected in the headwaters of the Eagle and delivered through the Homestake Tunnel to Turquoise and Twin Lakes Reservoir. Colorado Springs and Aurora are the partners in the Homestake Project. They each own 50% of the water diverted through the Homestake Tunnel. And then finally, the Busk-Ivanhoe Tunnel diverts water from the headwaters of the Roaring Fork River to the Arkansas River Basin. The water that's diverted through the Ivanhoe Tunnel is owned by Pueblo and Aurora. It was originally built as a way to get more water to the Arkansas River Basin for agricultural purposes, but Pueblo and Aurora bought all of the agricultural interests out, and now they own all that water. The Busk-Ivanhoe project was a subject of some litigation several years ago. Aurora wanted to change its agricultural interest to a municipal water right, and so they had to file a water rights application to do that. A number of West Slope entities opposed that, including several here in the Grand Valley. At trial, the trial court agreed with Aurora as to the amount of water that it wanted to take over to the eastern slope and convert to municipal purposes. That was appealed to the Colorado Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court overturned the trial court and agreed with the western slopes concerns. And so basically the Supreme Court decision limited the amount of water that Aurora could take over through the Busk-Ivanhoe system. So that was an important case, and put some parameters and some sideboards on how much water can be taken through a project like the Ivanhoe project that was originally agricultural and then turned into a municipal project. I don't have time to get into all the details. It's a very interesting case. Maybe that'll be the topic for a future talk. But to summarize, this is the infamous snake diagram that the State Engineer's Office has prepared, basically showing the rivers that flow out of Colorado. And the bigger the snake is, the more water heading out of the state. So you'll see the Arkansas and the South Platte rivers have fairly skinny snakes, and the West Slope rivers are fairly fat snakes, meaning a lot of water arises here on the western slope. The traditional wisdom is that 80% of the water arises on the west slope, but 80% of the population is on the east slope, and therein lies the tension. The east slope needs water to provide water to its citizens and for agriculture. And so that's why it has traditionally come looking to the west slope where the water is more abundant. Somewhere between 450 and 600,000 acre feet of water is diverted out of the Colorado River Basin each year over to the east slope in the Arkansas and South Platte basins. So that's a very substantial amount of water heading over to the east slope. And so that's the end of my talk. That's Ruedi Reservoir, the marina down here, and the dam for the reservoir is at the far end here. I'm happy to take any questions.
Sure. If anyone has questions, feel free to type them in, but also feel free to holler them out if there's a little space. Don't be shy. But I do have a question for you, Mark, from Kate Holmes. She's wondering what kind of prices are paid for water rights, and are they often bought and sold? And I guess there's probably different types of water rights that have different answers related to this. So maybe you have some thoughts on a couple different types there too.
Sure, that's an excellent question, and there's no answer to it. That's a good answer. Yes, water rights are bought and sold. I can state that definitely. The price that's paid for water really depends on the area that you're looking at. For example, Ute Water has its basic system is up on the north face of the Grand Mesa. It has a standing offer to buy water rights if somebody wants to sell an ag right up there to Ute Water. And I think Ute Water, the standing offer is somewhere around $3,000 or $3,500 an acre foot. So that's relatively inexpensive water up on the Grand Mesa. If you go over to the east slope and want to buy an acre foot of water from the Colorado Big Thompson project, the last number I heard for an acre foot of water from the Colorado Big Thompson project was somewhere in the neighborhood of $70,000 to $80,000. So you're all over the board on what the price of water is, and it really depends on what area of the state you're talking about and how critical the need for water is in that area of the state. And that's the best I can do. I hope that helped answer it somewhat.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That makes sense, Kate?
Yes, it does. As much
Great.
as I can understand this anyway.
Yeah, pricing of water rights is very difficult, and it really depends on the demand, who needs it, who's buying it. If you have municipalities buying it, they can afford to pay a lot more than a private person generally. So the market is the big driver for it, and it's an area that is hard to understand unless you understand the underlying water rights in the area and the needs of the entities in that area.
You pay the price once, and then are there yearly assessment type things, or is it once and done?
It depends. There can, if you're buying an interest in a reservoir company, for example, there will be yearly assessments. If you're just buying a water right that's not part of a company, there may not be any annual assessments, but there may be other costs such as maintaining the diversion structure, maintaining the ditches that the water flows in, things like that. So generally, it's not going to be a once and done. You're going to pay costs one way or another to maintain that water right.
Thank you.
Mark, I was curious about I noticed on, I think it was the Big Thompson and maybe a couple of the other maps you had of the diversion systems, that there were some pumps involved. And I would think that would be quite expensive to run some of those pumping infrastructures, or are they more gravity fed? Yeah, on that one. Just curious, do you know anything about those and kind of what those costs run and where the funding comes from associated with that?
I don't know what the costs run on something like this. This is a pumping plant. You'll see the FAR pump plant noted on here. And so it's my understanding that the water is pumped from Lake Granby up to Shadow Mountain Reservoir. You're right, the pumping is not cheap. That's got to be expensive. Basically it's paid for by the people that own the water from the Colorado Big Thompson project. So the Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District does assessments for on the people that own that water. And so those assessments pay for the costs of something like this pumping system here. Windy Gap also has a pump to pump from the Windy Gap Reservoir up to here. And that would be paid for by the municipalities that are part of the Windy Gap project.
Okay.
So, but I don't know the cost of that, but they're not inconsequential.
Yeah, I would think so. Does anyone else have questions for Mark today? I realize we're at 1 o'clock here, so I don't want to keep anyone if anyone needs to run off to another meeting. But I'm sure Mark would be happy to entertain another couple questions or so.
Mark, what is Boulder's key objections to raising the reservoir?
I don't know all of their objections. Basically, Boulder is saying that Denver, if you want to raise the reservoir, you have to come and get a permit from Boulder County to do that. And then Boulder would want to attach a whole bunch of conditions to that permit to benefit to the Boulder area. The people around the reservoir are up in arms about it because they don't want to have their property inundated by a raised reservoir. They're concerned about all the truck traffic that will be going up and down Boulder Canyon while the dam is being constructed. Boulder just is a little different in their attitudes about things, and I don't think they've ever gotten along very well with Denver, is my understanding. So it may just be bad blood and trying to get a pound of flesh out of Denver. But I'm not sure what the specific objections are. I wish I knew more, Larry, but I don't.
Yeah, thanks.
Anyone else have any questions? All right. Well, Mark, thank you so much for spending another lunch break with us and sharing some of your knowledge. This was every single one of these I've learned a lot from, so I really personally appreciate it, and I know everyone here does as well. And Mary, I don't know if we have any other lunches lined up. I know with summertime coming, we oftentimes slow down on some of those kind of things. But is there anything else that you wanted to share, Mary, about this next?
Now this is the final of the spring season. We hope to bring Mark back and some other speakers on the same topic of water, because I know we're all interested in it. So we'll look forward to doing that in the fall.
Sounds great. Well, thank you, Mark, and thank you all for being with us. And look out in the fall for our next series coming up.
Thank you.